You ever have one of those moments where time just stretches out and the strangest thing happens right in front of your eyes? Like, you're sitting on a plane, bored out of your mind, flipping through the same 3 pages of a magazine for the third time, and suddenly the guy in the seat next to you leans over and drops a bombshell confession that totally flips your day upside down? Yeah, that was me last month, stuck on a red-eye flight from New York to San Francisco, next to a stranger who, well, ended up changing a whole lot more than just the seat beside me. So here's how it all went down. I was flying out for a work thing. Nothing glamorous, just another conference where I'd nod politely, sip too much bad coffee, and count the minutes until I could escape back home. I'm the kind of guy who travels a lot but isn't great at small talk, so I was bracing myself for 7 hours of pretending to care about in-flight movies, and the guy next to me scrolling endlessly through his phone. I'd booked a window seat because, honestly, I'm a please-mere for the view, and when the guy sitting beside me showed up, I barely glanced up. He was tall, maybe early 30s, with these dark eyes framed by a pair of glasses that gave him this smart, approachable look. He had a calm vibe, like someone who's used to long flights and awkward silences. We exchanged the usual courtesy nods and awkward highs, then settled into that weird airplane bubble where you try not to invade each other's space but also don't want to be rude. I was busy scrolling through some work emails when I noticed he wasn't on his phone anymore. Instead, he was staring out the window, hands folded quietly on his lap, like he was miles away. I thought maybe he was just lost in thought. But then, about an hour in, he suddenly turned toward me with this nervous smile and said, "Hey, can I tell you something kind of unexpected?" Now, I should have known then that whatever he was about to say wasn't your regular, "I hate flying," or "sorry, I'm an aisle hog" kind of thing. But I just shrugged and said, "Sure, I'm all ears." Mostly because, well, what else do you do when you're trapped in a tiny metal tube 30,000 feet in the air with someone who looks like they're about to unload a secret? And then he looked me straight in the eye and said, "I've never actually told anyone this on a plane before, but I think I'm in love with my best friend, and he has no idea." It hit me so fast and so unexpectedly that I almost missed it. The guy next to me, this complete stranger, just confessed something so real, so raw that the usual drone of the plane faded into the background. Suddenly, the hours ahead felt like they might turn into something way more interesting than just trying to survive the flight. I blinked, probably looking as dumbfounded as I felt, because the guy chuckled nervously and added, "Yeah, I know." Total curveball, right? But it's been eating me up for months, and I just needed to say it out loud to someone. That's when I noticed the way his fingers fidgeted with the strap of his backpack, like he was trying to keep himself grounded. I wasn't sure why, but I felt this sudden urge to be that someone, the person who listens without judging, the one who sits quietly and offers a little space for messy feelings. So I nodded and said, "Hey, that's got to be tough. What's stopping you from telling him?" It wasn't a question I would expect to come up in an airplane conversation, but somehow it felt natural to ask. He sighed, and the tight smile he'd worn moments before softened. Fear, mostly. Fear of ruining what we have. He's my best friend, like the only person I've ever felt this close to. But what if telling him changes everything? What if he doesn't feel the same way, and suddenly it's awkward forever? His voice dropped just enough for me to hear the vulnerability in it. I thought about it for a second. Yeah, that's a real risk. But also, keeping it inside can be pretty brutal. It sounds like you're carrying a lot on your own. He looked at me then, a little surprised maybe, like he hadn't expected me to get it so quickly. "I guess I am," he admitted. "I'm Chris, by the way." He offered his hand, and I shook it. "I'm Matt." We slipped into a kind of easy rhythm after that, like two people who suddenly found themselves in the middle of a conversation that felt way more important than the usual flight chit-chat. Chris started telling me about his best friend, Jake, how they met in college, their shared love for hiking and terrible indie bands, and how Jake could light up a room just by walking in. The more Chris talked, the more I could see why he was so hesitant. Jake sounded amazing, and you could tell Chris wasn't just infatuated. There was genuine admiration there, the kind that grows over years of friendship and shared memories. But the way Chris's voice dropped when he talked about the unspoken part, the feelings he was scared to name, made the whole thing real and raw. At some point, the flight attendant came by with drinks, and I grabbed a water while Chris hesitated before ordering a soda. When she left, he leaned back in his seat and said, "You ever been in a situation where you want to tell someone something huge but are terrified of what comes after?" I nodded, thinking about the times I'd held back from saying things, not just about love, but about who I was, what I wanted. Yeah, it's like standing at the edge of a cliff. You want to jump, but you're scared you'll fall. Chris smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing a little. Exactly, except the cliff is my best friend. We fell into silence again, the hum of the plane filling the space between us. I caught a glance out the window. The sky was just starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Something about the moment felt important, like this wasn't just a random chat, but a turning point for both of us. Out of nowhere, Chris turned back to me and asked, "What about you? Ever had something you were terrified to admit to someone?" I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I wasn't usually the type to open up to strangers, especially on airplanes, but maybe there was something about him, his honesty, his nervous energy, that made me want to respond. I shrugged and said, "Honestly? Yeah. I've been in love before too, but it didn't work out. And after that, I kind of put all that stuff on hold. Pretended like it was easier just to avoid it." Chris nodded, like he really got it. That's rough. Avoidance feels safe until it's not, huh? Yeah, I said. It's like building walls so high you forget there's a world outside them. I looked at him then, feeling a strange mix of connection and curiosity. So, what do you think you're gonna do? With Jake, I mean. He looked out the window again, this time with a little more determination. I don't know yet, but I feel like if I don't say something soon, I'll regret it forever. And honestly, talking to you, it's helped. Made it less scary. Hearing that, I felt a little spark, a reminder that sometimes the right person shows up when you least expect it, even 35,000 feet in the air. And maybe, just maybe, this flight was about a lot more than just getting from point A to point B. The captain's voice came over the speakers, announcing we'd be starting our descent soon. Chris shifted in his seat, and I realized that the conversation was winding down, but neither of us really wanted it to end. He gave me a small, hopeful smile and said, "Thanks for listening, Matt." Seriously. I smiled back, feeling this strange mix of gratitude and something else, a flicker of something I wasn't ready to name. Anytime, Chris. And hey, maybe this is the start of something new for both of us. As the plane dipped lower, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Not just for Chris and Jake, but for me too. Because sometimes, the best stories begin with a confession you never saw coming. Once the seatbelt sign clicked off and we started taxiing toward the gate, I realized I didn't want to just let this end with a polite, "Nice meeting you," and an awkward shuffle to the terminal. There was something about Chris's openness, and maybe the fact that we'd shared this weird, intimate conversation at 35,000 feet that made me want to see where this could go. So I said, grabbing my carry-on, "You got his number?" "I mean, Jake's?" Chris laughed softly, a little self-deprecating. "Yeah, I do. We're pretty much inseparable, but I haven't brought myself to text him about this." He gestured vaguely, like trying to put feelings into words. I nodded, feeling a little protective over this guy who felt like he was carrying a secret too heavy for one flight. "Well, if you want, I can stick around. Grab a coffee or something before we go our separate ways." He looked surprised but pleased. "I'd like that." We shuffled off the plane together, moving through the bustling terminal with that awkward mix of strangers suddenly feeling less like strangers. The airport buzz was a sharp contrast to the quiet hum of the plane, but somehow it felt less intimidating now. We found a small cafe tucked near the gates, grabbed 2 black coffees, and settled into a corner booth. Chris was quieter now, his earlier nervous energy softened by the comfort of not being trapped in a cramped seat. I could tell he was turning over everything we'd talked about, maybe weighing whether to take that huge step, so I started, "What's the plan?" You gonna tell him? He sipped his coffee, eyes thoughtful. I want to, I really do, but it's like there's this wall I can't climb. I don't want to risk losing our friendship, even if it means never knowing what might have been. I understood that fear. I leaned back and said, sometimes the risk is necessary. Staying quiet can be its own kind of loneliness. I caught him looking at me with something like gratitude mixed with hesitation. Yeah, Chris murmured. You seem like you get it, I smiled, feeling a little bashful. I've been there. It's terrifying, but sometimes you have to trust that the people who really matter won't leave just because you show them your cracks. Chris looked down at his hands, then back up at me. What about you? Are you seeing anyone right now? I hesitated. Not really. Been out of the game for a bit. I guess I got burned and decided it was easier to keep things simple. There was a lump in my throat I didn't expect, and I quickly changed the subject. But hearing you today, maybe it's time I rethink that. He smiled, that same nervous but hopeful smile from the plane. What would it look like if you didn't keep things simple? I thought about that. Hard to say. I guess it would mean being honest with myself and others. Taking chances, even if it scares me. We sat there, the noise of the airport fading around us as we talked. For once, I wasn't just nodding along to polite small talk or work gossip. This felt real, like two people finding a rare moment of honesty. Before long, it was time to head out. Our flights were leaving within minutes of each other, and the goodbye felt bittersweet. Chris reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Here, he said, handing it to me. If you want to keep talking. I took it, fingers brushing against his as I did. I'd like that. We exchanged numbers, and as we stood up, the world felt a little less lonely than when we'd boarded together. Outside the cafe, the sun was finally up, casting warm light on the airport's glass walls. As we walked toward our gates, I found myself hoping this wasn't the end of the story. Chris had come into my life like a twist I didn't see coming, and somehow that confession mid-flight had broken through more than just the noise of the plane. It broke through my own walls. I caught a glance at him one last time before we parted ways, feeling that strange electric buzz of something new beginning. And honestly, I didn't want to wait to find out what came next. The days after the flight passed in this weird blur. I kept Chris's number in my phone, staring at it more times than I'd like to admit, wondering what to say without sounding like the guy who's way too invested after one conversation. Eventually, I just texted him, "Hey, hope the trip's going okay. Coffee again sometime?" It took a few hours, but he replied, "Yeah, the trip's been nuts. Coffee sounds good. When are you free?" That simple exchange kicked off something neither of us really expected, I think. We started texting more random thoughts, dumb jokes, little updates about the conference I was at, and his work back home. It was easy, natural, like picking up a conversation you didn't realize you wanted to keep having. A few days later, we met up in a quiet little cafe downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just a spot with good espresso and mismatched chairs. But sitting across from Chris felt like stepping into one of those rare moments where you can just be yourself without all the usual small talk. We talked about everything. His fear about telling Jake, my own hesitations about jumping back into dating, and somehow, beneath the jokes and casual chatter, there was this tension building. It wasn't the kind of tension that makes you want to bolt. It was the kind that makes your heart speed up for reasons you can't quite name yet. At one point, Chris looked down at his coffee, swirling it absently, and said, "You ever feel like you're standing at the edge of something but can't tell if you should jump or step back?" I nodded, because, yeah, I'd been standing at that edge a lot lately. All the time. He looked up, eyes searching mine. "I'm thinking about telling Jake. Like, really telling him. But it's terrifying." I reached out, almost without thinking, and brushed a stray hair from his forehead. Sometimes, the scariest things turn out to be the most worth it. He smiled softly, and for a second, the world shrank to just the two of us in that cafe. The background noise, the clatter of cups, the hum of strangers talking, it all faded. We spent the afternoon like that, talking and laughing, and slowly unraveling the walls we'd both built around ourselves. When it was time to go, Chris hesitated, then said, I'm grateful I sat next to you on that plane. Me too, I said. Funny how life works. Over the next week, we kept meeting whenever we could. Each time, the connection between us grew stronger, and I started to realize that this wasn't just some passing thing. There was something real here, something that made me want to take risks again, to be honest, not just with Chris, but with myself. Then one night, Chris called me out of the blue. His voice was tight, and I could tell something was up before he even said a word. I told him. He said, barely above a whisper. I sat back, heart pounding. You did? Yeah, it was messy, awkward, but I did it, and he doesn't hate me. Relief flooded through me, but I could also hear the uncertainty under his words. So what now? I asked. He laughed nervously. No idea, but at least it's out there. That night, we stayed on the phone for hours, talking about everything and nothing, the vulnerability between us growing stronger with every word. I realized I was falling for Chris, not just because of the secrets he'd shared, but because of the courage it took to share them. A few days later, we met again, this time in a park near my apartment. It was chilly, but the air felt electric as we walked side by side, the city lights flickering around us. Chris stopped and looked at me, his eyes shining. There's something I want to try. Something I've been too scared to say. I swallowed hard, heart racing. What is it? He smiled shyly and reached for my hand. I want to see if this, whatever it is between us, could be something more. I squeezed his hand back, feeling a mix of disbelief and hope. Me too, Chris. Me too. That night, we ended up sitting on a bench, fingers intertwined, talking about how unexpected moments, like sitting next to a stranger on a plane, could completely change your life. And honestly, I never would have guessed that a random seatmate would become the person who helped me rediscover the courage to love again. After that night in the park, things between Chris and me started to shift into new territory, one that felt exciting, but also pretty terrifying. I mean, here we were, two guys who met by chance on a plane, suddenly navigating the murky waters of something that might actually be a relationship. It wasn't like we had a roadmap. We were just feeling our way around, trying not to mess it up. For the first few weeks, we kept things low-key. We'd hang out on weekends, grab dinner or go for walks, sometimes just sit in my apartment watching terrible movies and making fun of the dialogue. It was comfortable and easy, but beneath that comfort, I could feel this growing anticipation, like we were both waiting for the other shoe to drop. One evening, about a month after that park bench conversation, Chris invited me over to his place. I'd never been to his apartment before, so I didn't know what to expect. When I arrived, the place was surprisingly cozy, not flashy, but with little touches that felt distinctly him. A scratched-up guitar leaning in the corner, a shelf full of worn books, and photos pinned up on the wall of mountains and forests. We settled into his living room, and after a bit of small talk, Chris turned serious. Matt, there's something I haven't told you yet, he said, running a hand nervously through his hair. I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep my face neutral. Okay, what's up? He took a deep breath. When I told Jake how I felt, it didn't go exactly the way I hoped. He was surprised, obviously, and said he needed space to think. Since then, things have been weird between us. I could see the disappointment flicker in his eyes, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry, man. That please mess. Yeah, he sighed. I guess I thought confessing would make things better, but now it feels like I'm in this limbo where I don't know if he wants to be friends or if it's over completely. I reached out and put my hand over his. That's a rough spot to be in, but you did what a lot of people can't. You were honest. That takes guts. Chris smiled faintly, but the tension in his jaw didn't disappear. Thanks. I just hate feeling like I messed everything up. I shook my head. You didn't mess anything up. You gave him the truth, and you gave yourself a chance. It was quiet for a while after that. I could tell Chris was wrestling with a lot, and honestly, I was feeling it too. The idea that his friendship with Jake might be over was hard, but watching Chris handle it with such honesty made me respect him even more. That night, before I left, Chris surprised me. He pulled me in close and kissed me. a soft, tentative kiss that felt like a promise rather than a conclusion. It was the first time our relationship felt real, in a way that wasn't just about potential, but about something tangible. After that, our dynamic shifted again. We started talking about what we wanted, what we were afraid of, and what we hoped might happen. Chris opened up about how long he'd been carrying those feelings for Jake, and I shared the story of my last relationship, how I'd walked away because I was scared to be vulnerable again. One afternoon, we went hiking. Not the rugged kind, just a trail near the city that overlooked the skyline. We talked about everything and nothing, taking turns telling stories about our lives. Halfway up the trail, Chris stopped and looked at me. You know, I never thought I'd find someone like this on a plane. It sounds crazy, but meeting you has made me realize I deserve more than just quiet desperation. I smiled, feeling my chest tighten in a good way. Me too. I was stuck in this loop of, maybe someday, but you've made me want to try again. We stood there for a moment, the wind tugging at our jackets, the city sprawling beneath us. It was the kind of moment you wish you could hold on to, the kind that feels like the start of something important. But even as things started feeling more hopeful, the shadow of Jake lingered. Chris checked his phone a little more often, sometimes staring at it like he wanted to send a message but couldn't. I tried not to push, knowing he had to figure it out in his own time. A few nights later, Chris called me, voice low and urgent. Matt, I think I need to tell you something. It's about Jake and me. I sat up straight, sensing the weight behind his words. I ran into Jake yesterday. It was awkward, but we talked. He said he needed time, but also that he didn't want to lose me. Hearing that, relief mixed with caution swirled in my chest. That sounds promising. Yeah, Chris said, but it's complicated. I'm realizing that while I still care about Jake, I'm also opening up to new possibilities with you. My heart skipped, and I felt a rush of warmth. Chris, I'm here for whatever you need. We'll figure it out together. For the first time in weeks, I heard genuine hope in his voice. Thanks, Matt. That means a lot. We ended the call with promises to see each other soon. As I lay in bed that night, I realized that life had thrown me a curveball again, one that felt messy and uncertain, but also full of unexpected promise. This whole thing started with a confession at 30,000 feet. Now, it was unfolding into something that neither of us could have planned, but both of us wanted to see through. And honestly, I was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Chris was juggling this complicated situation with Jake, and I was trying to figure out where I fit into the picture without stepping on any toes or rushing things. It was delicate, unpredictable, and honestly, kind of scary, but also strangely exhilarating. Like we were all characters in this story that hadn't been written yet. Chris and I kept seeing each other regularly, but there was always this underlying tension, a quiet question hanging between us. How long before Jake came back into the picture? Would he even come back? And if he did, what would that mean for us? One weekend, about 2 weeks after Chris's conversation with Jake, we went out for dinner at a small Italian place Chris loved. The kind of place where the lights are low and the chatter blends into a soft background hum. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, Chris was quieter than usual. Finally, he pushed his plate aside and looked at me. Matt, I need to be honest. Jake reached out again. He wants to meet. I swallowed, trying to keep my expression neutral. Okay. Chris ran a hand through his hair, clearly wrestling with something. I'm torn. Part of me wants to see him, to maybe figure out if there's a chance for us. But another part of me, I don't want to lose what we have. I took a breath and reached for his hand across the table. Look, you have to do what's right for you. I'm not here to make decisions for you, but whatever happens, I want you to be honest with me. He smiled, a little relieved. I will. And I appreciate that more than I can say. That night, as I walked home, I thought about how strange it was to feel so connected to someone, while also feeling like you were waiting for a storm to pass. But I also realized that this messiness, this uncertainty, was part of what made it real. The next day, Chris and I texted throughout the afternoon. He told me he was meeting Jake that evening at a quiet cafe near the park where we'd first really talked. I tried to be supportive, but my stomach twisted in knots. Later that night, Chris called me. His voice was softer, quieter than usual. It was complicated. We talked, and he admitted he didn't know how to handle everything. But there's no immediate answer. We agreed to take it slow. I exhaled, the tension in my chest loosening just a bit. That sounds like progress. Yeah, Chris said. But it also made me realize I care about you too, more than I thought I would. My heartbeat quickened. I feel the same way. There was a pause. Then he said, maybe we should stop trying to predict the future and just see where this goes. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. I like that idea. Over the following weeks, Chris and I found a rhythm. We weren't rushing anything, but we were building something, slowly, carefully, with a mixture of hope and realism. Every time Chris had a conversation with Jake, he was honest with me about it, and I tried to stay grounded, reminding myself that this wasn't a race. One rainy afternoon, we were curled up on my couch watching an old comedy when Chris turned to me and said, "You know, it's funny. I never expected to meet someone like you on a plane, but now I can't imagine not having you in my life." I felt my throat tighten. Same here. He reached out, fingers brushing against mine, and I realized how much I'd come to crave his presence, the way he could make the world feel less daunting with just a smile or a touch. Then came the day when Chris told me Jake had decided he needed more time apart. It was bittersweet news. Chris was sad, sure, but there was also a sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted. "I think this means I can finally stop waiting," Chris said, eyes shining with something like hope. "I want to see where this goes." "With you," I nodded, heart pounding. "Me too." That night, as we sat together, the city glowing through the window behind us, Chris leaned in and kissed me with a confidence that took my breath away. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in the possibility of something real, something worth fighting for. Sometimes I think back to that flight, the nervous confession, the unexpected connection. Who knew that a random airport seatmate would become the person I'd want to share anything and everything with? Life's funny like that. It throws you into the unknown, and if you're lucky, you find someone to hold on to while you figure it out together. Months passed, and with each one, Chris and I built something steady. Something that didn't have to be perfect or rushed, just real. Jake faded into the background, not because he was forgotten, but because Chris made a choice. Not out of bitterness or fear, but out of clarity. He wanted to be present with me, here and now. One chilly evening, we found ourselves back at that same park where we'd first talked about jumping off cliffs and taking chances. The city lights stretched before us, and the air was filled with the quiet comfort of familiarity. Chris held my hand, fingers entwined like they'd always belonged that way. "I've been thinking," he said softly, eyes reflecting the glow of the skyline, "about how much that flight changed everything. About how sometimes life surprises you when you least expect it." I nodded, feeling that same quiet gratitude settle in my chest. "Yeah, who knew a random seatmate could end up meaning so much?" He smiled, a little shy but sure. "I'm glad it was me." We sat there for a while, not needing to fill the silence, just content to share the moment. It wasn't about grand declarations or perfect endings. It was about two people who had found something worth holding on to in the middle of life's chaos. Later, walking back to our cars, Chris stopped and turned to me. "I don't know what the future holds, and honestly, that's kind of scary, but I do know that I want to figure it out with you." I felt a warmth spread through me, not from the cold air, but from something deeper. "Me too, Chris. Let's take it one day at a time." He grinned, that same nervous but hopeful grin from our very first conversation. One day at a time. As I drove home that night, I thought about how strange and wonderful it was that a simple seating assignment on a plane had set all of this in motion. Life has a funny way of connecting people when you're not looking. And sometimes, the best stories start with a confession you never saw coming. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other. And for now, that was more than enough.